Okay, Revelation chapter 13. I will read the whole chapter, and I'll be reading from the NRSV. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Let anyone who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. It exercises all authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in sight of all. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived, and it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. This is the written word of the Lord. Okay. Well, here we go. This is fun. The mark of the beast and all that is contained within. A lot of good stuff. Something to note before we go through this is remember that these images aren't written in veiled symbols in order to hide the meaning, any more than calling Christ the Lamb was intended to hide who Christ is. Christ is easily identifiable as the Lamb. When we read through Revelation, we see the Lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. We say, oh, obviously that's Christ. It tells us something about the nature of Christ. And so it is here. The images and the stuff that they're not veiled images to hide something from the reader. They're not a code to be figured out. They're intended to reveal something to the reader. After all, the book is titled Revelation. It's a revealing. This is not to hide. These are not hidden things. This is a revelation for the people. The question becomes for us then is, what is John trying to reveal to the readers? What are the readers to understand from this? And so that's what we're going to discuss tonight. That's what we're looking at tonight. And as I was preparing for this, an image came to mind that really helped me. Over the last few weeks, I watched this. It was a TV show on Netflix. It became really popular. It was just put out, and it's called Stranger Things. And it's a kind of a thriller, scary movie type miniseries. And it's really well done, and I have a lot of questions, and I want to know what happened and all type of things. But in the TV show, there's this place, a few spoilers if you're going to watch it, there's this place that people get kind of taken to, and they end up calling that place the Upside Down. And they're taken to a world that is the normal world, only it's upside down. Only it's not a place that's filled with life. It's a place that's filled with destruction. It's kind of this anti-realm, if you will. And as I was preparing for tonight, I thought, you know what, that's a good image, because this whole chapter is not filled with life, it's filled with anti-things. This whole chapter is the upside down. It's not the real, it's not the life of the kingdom. It's the world on the opposite side of the kingdom. So we're beginning to see in this chapter what life is like on the other side. We're seeing those who are not Christ or the kingdom. We're seeing those agents that are upside down, that are the opposite, those that seek to destroy Christ. And this whole chapter is filled with antis, a whole bunch of antis. So, do you guys remember how chapter 12 ended? You remember where the dragon is located? On the shore. That was important. Why? Because where do these two beasts come from? One from the sea and one from the land. The dragon is on the shore because it is summoning these two beasts, one from the sea and one from the land. And like the last chapter, one of the things to note is that this chapter is not really future prediction. It's a call to endure. It's a call to faithfulness. Verse 10 tells us the purpose of this chapter. Here is the call for the endurance and faith of the saints. This is why this chapter is in here, so that the saints will endure and so that the saints will have faith. That's the purpose of this chapter. The purpose is not to give us a future set of events that are going to unfold in a specific way at a specific time. So with that as a precursor, let's go ahead and move through this. Yeah, this is not a set course of events that are going to necessarily take place in a predictive way in the future. And that should become clear as we go throughout the chapter tonight. So, starting at verse 1.
As I read the chapter, I thought that was a hard testing that God gave the saints, because he lets all these things happen to test those who are faithful. And I said, that's a hard testing.
So they said that this was a hard testing. Well, what we'll see, is it God that's doing the testing here or not? Because I don't believe we'll see that it is God who is performing these things against the saints. It's the beasts.
But he allows it.
But God allows it, and that's the
beasts to do these horrible things, and which those things do test the saints.
Right. You're getting to a big question, Solveig, that is called theodicy, the problem of evil. What do you do with the fact that God has allowed evil to exist in the world at all? And that's a very big question. And we Wesleyans, we believe that we have free will. And we believe that we can choose other than God. And our choosing other than God affects not only us, it affects our neighbors, and it affects other people. And so what we're seeing here is people and entities and systems that choose other than God. And it plays out in these ways. And if God is love, love is not coercive. Love is freeing. And so there's this big question of what do you do with the fact that a loving God has permitted evil to take place even against the saints of the church? And it's a big question that we probably will not answer in the next 45 minutes or in the next lifetime.
I think we need to realize that evil comes because of sin. If
Right.
it hadn't been for Adam and Eve sinning, the evil would not be here. So we have to remember that. I think that's important.
Right. Yeah, so let's move on through the chapter. There's a lot to get through tonight. And hopefully we can address some of that throughout our study. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. What does this beast look like? Does it look familiar? Yeah, we'll get to Daniel, but in the first verse, does it look back to chapter 12? Does it look like something else? It looks eerily similar to the dragon. This is like a twin to the dragon. Described in almost the exact same way. The dragon who is whom? The dragon who is Satan. There's one difference, though, between how the dragon is described and how this beast rising out of the sea is described. Can you spot the one difference? The horns. The dragon had how many horns? Chapter 12. The dragon had 10 horns?
7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 3 said, another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns.
Yes.
7 heads and 10 horns.
7 horns, 10 horns, and 7 diadems on its head. How many crowns are on the beast? The dragon had 7 crowns, diadems, and the beast has 10. Instead of 7 diadems, the beast now has 10. Why would the beast have 10 crowns on its head? Oh, yes. But why 10 instead of 7?
Well, there's 10 horns and only 7 heads.
Right.
So down the heads, there's only 7, and down the horns, there's 10.
What is the symbolism of a greater number of crowns? More power, a heightened desire to gain sovereignty. That's what this is. But there's another reason it has 10 horns. And now you can go back to Daniel 7. Look at the 4th beast in Daniel chapter 7. How is this beast described? In verse 7, the 4th beast, how is it described? Right before verse 8, 10 horns. Does that sound familiar? How many horns does the beast have? 10. And now, look at the other 3 beasts from Daniel 7. How are they described? The first beast is what? Lion. The second beast is what? A bear. The third beast is what? A leopard. Does that sound familiar? Look at Revelation 13:2. In the beast that I saw, the one beast that I saw that had the 10 horns was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Does that sound familiar? He's stealing the imagery from Daniel 7. Once again, this is what John does. In order to understand what John is indicating by all of this, in order to see what Revelation is saying, we have to understand what Daniel is saying, because he's taking the imagery from another text. John is stealing this. In Daniel chapter 7, these 4 beasts, they serve to indicate 4 separate empires that will rise up before the kingdom of God comes. That's what Daniel was describing. And so in Revelation, there's one beast that is comprised of the 4 beasts from Daniel. The one beast in Revelation is all 4 of them put together. What does that mean?
They will go together to fight against God's people.
This is the beast of beasts. This is all 4 of them put together. This is like Megatron. The Transformers all came together and made the one big beast. That's right. It indicates, what does it represent then? If the 4 beasts were the 4 empires to rise up before the kingdom of God was to come, what are these 4? What is this one beast? It's the empire of empires. It represents all empire. The threats presented by 4 seclusive empires are part of the one great threat now, and they will fight against the faithful. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne. This beast was given the power and the throne and the authority of the dragon. This beast is beginning to sound similar to another character we've read about in the story. At another time in Revelation, can you think of one who shared a throne with someone else? Who shared the throne? Jesus shares the throne with the Father. The Lamb sits on the throne with the Father. Christ shares the Father's throne. Here, this person, this being, this beast is beginning to sound familiar in some ways, was given great authority. And here, when you get to verse 3, one of its heads had what seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. Something to note here is the actual Greek. When you look at the Greek, it's really interesting. What the NRSV calls a death blow, who has the NIV? What does it say in the NIV? Does it say death blow in the fatal wound? Okay. Well, in the Greek, we might literally translate this, he was slaughtered to death. Slaughtered to death. That word slaughter is there in the Greek. Do you know where else we heard the word slaughter or slain? A lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. It's the same word that described the lamb. Now it's describing this beast, one of the heads of the beast. Sound familiar? Kind of sounds like the lamb, doesn't it? But it had been healed. The lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. Does slaughtered lamb stand? No. So this is an anti-lamb, or this is an anti-Christ figure. But there's likely a specific reference, not only for the beast in general, which we've seen is representing empire already, and we'll see that even further, but there's likely a specific reference for also this particular head of the beast. Some have made the point that these heads of the beast are different emperors within the Roman Empire. And this would make sense. When you think of this head, we've already talked about Emperor Nero in the past, but many attribute this head that had received this death blow but had been healed. They associate this with Emperor Nero, who was notorious with his warring with the saints. He slaughtered Christians way too much. I mean, any is too much, but he was terrible. He also killed himself by stabbing himself in the throat. He killed himself, but around Rome there circulated this rumor that Nero hadn't actually been killed, and that he was going to come back and he was going to take his seat on the throne again. Nero was coming back. He wasn't actually dead. Like Elvis, there were conspiracy theorists that said Nero is coming back from the dead. In fact, there were actually Nero impersonators. There were those who pretended that they were Nero, and they would march through Rome and say, "I'm Nero coming back for my throne," because there was this myth that Nero was coming back. So this head received a mortal wound, but the wound had been healed. If you're a first century person living in Asia Minor under Roman rule after Nero has killed himself, and you have this myth circulating throughout the Roman Empire that Nero's coming back, this sounds like Nero. He's not really dead. He's coming back. So that is likely the reference that we have here. And what did this beast do? In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. The beast amazed the whole earth. What did they do? They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast. So we have this anti-worship now. Worship not of God, but of the dragon and the beast. And what did they say? Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And these questions serve two purposes. On one level, they seem to be anti-Christian. They sound like the psalmist. Psalm 113 says, "Who is like the Lord?" This is who is like the beast? The whole earth says, who is like him and who can fight against him? But on another level, to the Christian, to the saint, to the follower, As the whole earth stands in awe asking these questions, as if the answer was no one is like him and no one could fight against him, Christians know the answer. These questions that the whole earth asks, as if the answer is, well, no one's like the beast, Christians respond to them and say, what? The Lamb. Who is like the beast? Who can fight against him? Well, the Lamb. The dragon has already been kicked out of heaven. It's what we read in chapter 12. And the Lamb that has been slaughtered is standing. It's alive. See, the question is not who is like the beast. The question is who is like the Lord. Because the beast is imitating the Lamb. The beast is trying to look like the Lamb. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will. The beast is an imitated derivative form of Christ, not the other way around. And the answer to the question, who can fight against him, is simple. Christ, the Lamb. So in one sense, these questions, they imply the answer, well, no one, to those who worship the beast. But to the faithful followers, the answer is simple. Christ, the Lamb. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for how long? 3.5 years. For a while. For a season. For a time.
But it didn't use the same reference that it always has for the 3.5 years, which is either 3.5 years or 1,260 days.
Right. This is described in months rather than in years or days. Absolutely. Is the beast given authority for eternity? No. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. Who does the beast fight against? The faithful. Against God, against the angelic beings in heaven, and against the saints on earth. This is an attack on faithfulness at all levels. It was given authority over whom? Tribe and people and language and nation. Does that sound familiar? Once again, we see evidence that this is describing empire in general, and perhaps the empire of Rome in particular, because Rome was known to have authority over almost all of the known earth at the time. It was known to incorporate people from various tribes, various peoples, various languages, and various nations. The Empire of Rome had all of these different cultures and people groups within it. But once again, this is the upside down. This is the anti-reality. It was given authority over people of every language, nation, tribe. Does that sound like something else you've read? This mirrors the saints, who are made up of whom? You remember from Revelation chapter 7, the 144,000. John heard 144,000, then he looked, and what did he see? A multitude from every language, every nation. This is the anti-saint, or this is the anti-kingdom. It was given authority over all these people. Not that all these people freely chose it, but that it was given authority over it. We'll see this more clearly in the next chapter as well, in Revelation chapter 14, because we're going to see the 144,000 again. They're going to show up next time. And all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. So all the inhabitants, here we're beginning to see a bit of a polarization. There are those whose name is written in the book of life. There are those whose names aren't. And this will be developed a little bit further in the chapter. But we're seeing that there are two camps here. You can be in one or you can be in the other, but you can't be in both. And we're beginning to see that. And this is not that people's names will be written later on, it's what? They're already written. This is the prevenient grace of God. This is God providing grace in the midst of tumult. It's not escape, it's endurance. It's not being pulled out of, it's having faithfulness in the midst of. Because obviously, the saints are not freed from suffering, are they? They're not told that there will be no suffering, are they? No, they're told to endure in the midst of empire. Let anyone who has an ear listen. Who doesn't have an ear? You guys know people who don't have ears. Who is this to? Everyone. Hey, do you have an ear? Pay attention. This is to everyone. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. This is a warning not to live like the beast. This is a warning to the faithful. Citizens of the kingdom, they don't employ the tactics of the empire. Christians conquer the beast not by inflicting more damage than the beast does, but by following an alternative course of faithful endurance and resistance to idolatry and oppression that has been set by the Lamb. That's written by Craig Keister, one of the commentaries I read. The beast is not, Christians don't conquer the beast by inflicting more damage than the beast does, but by following an alternative course of faithful endurance and resistant to idolatry and oppression that has been set by the Lamb. So citizens of the kingdom, they don't employ the tactics of the empire. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. What then is the implication for the saints? Do you respond to the sword with the sword? Evidently not. If you kill with the sword, you will die by the sword.
Do not return evil with evil.
Do not return evil with evil. And as a brief aside, this has really been sticking out to me recently. Romans 12, Paul writes to love your enemies. And he says, provide them a glass of cool water. By doing so, you will be heaping a burning coal on their head. Now, in our context, we think that sounds terrifying. A burning coal on top of your head. This sounds violent. But that doesn't mesh with the whole don't repay evil with evil. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be nice to you because then it's really going to hurt you. That's counterintuitive. But in a culture where people carried things on their heads, like many do in the continent of Africa today, when I studied in Uganda, I tried to carry things on my head. I couldn't do it, but I tried. When they would carry things on top of their head, heaping a burning coal on someone's head was not inflicting pain upon them. You were giving them a live coal in their basket as they go home, so that when they go home, they have an ember by which they can start a fire, so that they can cook and clean and drink. By being kind to them, by not repaying evil with evil, you're not inflicting damage on them. You're providing a means for them to live. You're providing a way out for them. And so that's the consistent theme throughout the New Testament. It's don't repay evil with evil, because if you do that, then you're going to die by the sword. If you kill with the sword, you're going to die by the sword. But in the example we have set in Christ, you lay down your life. You love your enemy because perhaps that's the only way for your enemy to get out of the evil that they're stuck in, even if it comes at your own expense. And that's a hard word. And so then John writes, here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Why is this chapter being written? So that the saints will endure. So that they'll continue to have faithfulness in the midst of difficulty. Because, as we've already read, they are in the midst of difficulty. We've already read about the trials and the difficult situations they found themselves in. Any questions before we move on to the second half, starting at verse 11? Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. All right, beast number 2, here we go. Beast number 2, rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. What does it look like? Looks like a lamb. Once again, it's an imitation of Christ. Only, does it sound like Christ? No. Who does it speak like? The dragon. Satan. And it exercises authority on the first beast on its behalf. Only this isn't exactly an antichrist, because this one does not exercise, this one is not the first beast. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on the first beast's behalf. It's not the beast. It's not the first beast. It's a little bit lesser of a being. Who is it, though? That's the question. That's the question. Who is the second beast? It looks like Christ. It doesn't speak like Christ. And it makes the inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound had been healed. Once again, there's an allusion to the first beast, who is an antichrist figure. What does the second beast do? Starting in verse 13, it performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all. Who does this sound like? Do you remember anyone who could rain down fire from heaven onto the earth in the book of Revelation? There were 2 of them. I'll give you a hint. The witnesses. They were given the power to rain down fire. This is the anti-prophet. If the dragon is the anti-God and the first beast is an antichrist, the beast that rises out of the earth is an anti-prophet, performing great signs, causing fire to rain down from heaven in the sight of all. This is like the 2 messengers we read about earlier. Only they're false prophets. This beast is a false prophet. What's the sign of a true prophet? Is a prophet merely one who can do great signs? Or is it what those signs point people towards? Do these signs point people to worship God? No, what does it say in verse 12? It makes the earth and its inhabitants worship whom? The first beast. Is this the worship of the saints? Is this the worship of God? Is this the worship of Christ? No, this is worship of the beast. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of earth, telling them to make an image for the first beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived. Once again, an allusion to the false resurrection. The anti-resurrection appears for a 3rd time. But what do we see here in verse 14? Creating an image. This is idol worship. What is the call in verse 10? What is the call that the point of this chapter? For endurance and for what? Faithfulness. Idol worship is not faithfulness. Revelation is so often about first commandment faithfulness. First commandment, love the Lord your God. Put God first. Do not have any idols. And the beast is allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. There may be a specific reference here, because it's documented in ancient Rome that there was one called Alexander the False Prophet, who had carved an idol, and using a system of pulleys and levers was able to move the mouth of the idol, and there was a person underneath or behind the idol who would speak or make sounds so that it looked and sounded the idol was speaking, and presumably made a lot of money doing that. So there could be this kind of comical image, but this reference is anything but comical. This is incredibly serious. This is empire puppetry. The beast was allowed to give breath to the image so it could speak. It's smoke and mirrors. The beast tries to get people to believe that idols are real things, giving breath to the image so it could speak. But Christians know that idols aren't real things. But this false or anti-prophet tries to convince people otherwise, trying to convince people to worship an image of the beast. Also, it causes both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave to be marked. Here we go. On the right hand or on the forehead. So now we're getting into this fun mark of the beast. The thing that has caused so much consternation, particularly in the last century. But like the rest of this chapter, the mark of the beast is a mirror of kingdom realities. It's the upside down. It's the anti-reality. It is the beast trying to be like Christ. Remember back to Revelation 7, and we'll look at it again in 2 weeks when we read Revelation 14. There are the 144,000 who have what? They have the seal of God. And then in the next chapter, we'll get more clarification. It says that the 144,000 have the name of the Father written on their forehead. Sound familiar? Christians carry the mark of the Lamb. What we take away from these various markings is that everyone belongs to someone. If an angel places God's name as a seal on the foreheads of the worshipers of God, chapter 7 and 14, the beast from the land places the name of the beast from the sea on the foreheads or the right hands of the worshipers of the beast. Everyone belongs to someone. The only question is whether one bears the name of the true God or the name of the counterfeit God. There are two markings in Revelation. The mark of the beast has received a lot of attention. Unfortunately, we don't pay as much attention to the mark of the Lamb. Every person belongs to someone. The only question is whether one bears the name of the true God or the name of the counterfeit God. And one thing, we need not think that this is a literal or visible mark. Some have speculated about a mark being credit cards or social security numbers or this or that. And as we go on, we'll see that that's not what's taking place here. But we need not think of this as a literal visible mark any more than Christ is a literal lamb. Any more than the beast has literal horns. It indicates allegiance and worship. What if we have a phrase today? Do I have something written on my forehead? What does that mean? Why do we say that? Is it obvious what I'm doing, right? You can't hide your allegiance. You can't hide it. It's going to come out. You belong to someone. Do you belong to the true God or the counterfeit God? That's the question. So that, here we go, no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So there's a really interesting reference point here. Once again, we're living in a culture, in a Roman culture, Roman Empire. We're living in a culture of idol worship and empire worship. Caesar was very often considered to be a god or a demigod or a son of a god. And citizens of Rome were forced to worship the emperor. And it had pervaded Roman society so much they had trade guilds. They would have these societies of workers. And oftentimes, a lot of these places of work would have temples or sacrifices to gods or to the emperor. And in order to participate in these trade guilds, you had to pledge your worship to the emperor. So to even participate in the economy of the Roman Empire, you had to give your worship to the emperor. You had to give your worship to the empire. So no one could buy or sell who did not have the mark. If Christians refuse to worship alternative gods, if the faithful refuse idolatry, if they refuse to pledge their allegiance to the empire, how do they participate in these trade guilds, in these worker unions? They didn't. They were not permitted a place in the economy because they refused to give their allegiance and worship to the empire. So this is the specific reference, not necessarily that at some future point in time, Christians aren't going to be permitted to buy things. We're seeing this happened in real time for Christians in the Roman Empire. And what we'll see in a little bit is that this happens in real time throughout history. This is describing what happened, what is happening, and what will happen. Christians who refuse to worship something other than God are often not permitted in the local economies. They refuse to participate either by the empire or by their own volition. There are some times that Christians refuse to participate in a local economy because of its injustice or because of its oppression. So Christians don't participate in the purchasing of products that have been made by slaves. Or we try not to, because that's an injustice. And Christians believe that people are created in the image of God. So we don't participate in economic systems that kill or maim or perpetuate injustices. This is what it means that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark. Christians could not participate in a lot of the economic realities of Rome at the time. Then verse 18, this calls for wisdom. This is an important qualifier. What we would hear today is, hey, pay attention. Hey, listen. If you've been sleeping throughout the reading, wake up. This calls for wisdom. John is telling the hearers that they need to use their heads. They know what he's describing. He's saying, hey, you know what I'm going to be describing. You got to figure it out. Pay attention. Let anyone with an understanding calculate the number of the beast. Calculate the number of the beast. Now, in Rome, there was something called, we do this today sometimes, called gematria. It is where you assign a number, assign a letter with a numeric value. And we do this sometimes. I think when you're kids, you'll write letters to each other, and each letter of the alphabet is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you write in a code or whatever. Well, in Rome, the Roman numerals were letters. Letters had an assigned value to them. And this kind of stuff happened all the time. There are actually records of someone writing, whatever his name is, I can't remember, whatever this Roman person's name is, Hippolytus plus 434 forever. And unless you're 434, or unless you're Hippolytus, you have no clue who that person is. Because you can calculate from a name and get a numeric value, but you can't necessarily have a numeric value and then calculate a name from that value. So it'd be like you could see on a tree, 343 plus 678 equals forever. It's really hard to work backwards. If you aren't 343 and 678, if you don't already know the name, then you're not going to be able to figure it out. But if you already know the name, then you can calculate the value. If you already know someone's name, you can figure out their numeric value. Does that make sense? Are you understanding what I'm saying there? You can work from a name to a number, but unless you already know the name, you can't work from the number to the name, because there could be a million combinations that could equal that one numeric value. And we're told that it's a number of a person, right? So John is saying, hey, you know what we do? You know how we do this? This is the number of a person. Calculate the number of the beast. Think about people. And what is the reference point that we've been looking at up to this point? An empire, this is the Roman Empire. Think of the Roman Empire. Think of people associated to positions of power in the Roman Empire and calculate the number. He's saying you should be able to figure this out. It's the number of a person. And then what is the number? 666, this terrifying number. On the one hand, this number indicates imperfection. 7 is the number of perfection, right? And what does 3 indicate? Completion. This is complete imperfection. 666. It's complete imperfection. Utter imperfection. It's not 7. It's 6. This is the upside down. This is the anti-world. This is not the world of the kingdom that's being described. This is the world of empire, which is anti-kingdom. But we're also told it does not just bear symbolic weight, it's also the number of a person. And here is maybe where we get literal in Revelation. Do you know who it is? I'll give you a hint. We've already talked about him tonight. Nero. Nero. In Hebrew, if you were to use gematria in Hebrew using the name Neron Kaiser, Caesar Nero, Neron Kaiser in Hebrew, do you know what the value of those letters are? 666. But have you ever heard 616? Have you heard that that's the number of the beast? In some early manuscripts, it says that the number of the beast is 616. Some of the early manuscripts of Revelation don't have 666, they have 616. So some have said the number of the beast is either 616 or 666. Well, if you remove the N from Neron Kaiser, which has a value of 50, if you remove the N from Neron Kaiser and you have Nero Kaiser, what's the value? 616, subtract 50. So there are some manuscripts that say 666 and some manuscripts that say 616, both referencing one person, Nero, an emperor who is notorious for his persecution and execution of Christians. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. This isn't saying that there will be some day in the future where a beast is going to reign on earth demanding that humanity worship another beast, and then they're going to have the number 666 or 616 literally tattooed on their foreheads or on their hands. That's not what John is describing. John is describing what life under empire is like. He's describing what it's like to live in a system that is not the kingdom of God. This is the anti-kingdom. An empire necessarily is anti-kingdom. Empire is anti-Christian, filled with antichrists and anti-prophets. Empire demands to be worshipped. An empire can demand that if people don't worship the empire, well, then they can't buy or trade or sell. They can't participate in the local economy if they're not pledging their whole self to the empire. This is what happened in Rome. And this is what happens in other empires throughout history. One example that I thought of was a present-day empire. What's going on, particularly in Iraq and Syria, with the Islamic State. Do you guys know what the Arabic letter Nun looks like? You've probably seen it at some point. It's like a U with the 2 dots on top. It's the letter N in Arabic, and it's written. When it's used, it's used to recognize the word Nazarene in Arabic. Who was the Nazarene? Christ. Have you seen this in Iraq and in Syria where the Islamic State has been writing noon on people's homes? If it was to indicate those who associated themselves with the one who was called the Nazarene. And the Islamic State would paint it on the doorposts or the sides of Christian homes. And these families were told that they had to convert to Islam, they had to pay a tax, or they would be killed. Does that sound like something we've just read in Revelation chapter 13? Worship another god. Affecting your economy, you can't participate in the economy here, or you'll be killed. This is the beast. This is the beast rearing its ugly head once again, demanding the worship of false gods, preventing people from buying or selling, and giving them the mark, and ultimately killing the saints. This is what it's like as a Christian in first century Rome, and unfortunately, this is what it's like as a Christian under Islamic State rule. So this isn't just a future prediction of what's going to happen over the whole earth. This is what happens when empire exists. This is what happens when the anti-kingdom shows its ugly head. A head that looks like it has been slaughtered to death, but has been healed. Head that is an anti-resurrection. So this is the chapter of the antis. If I were to title this chapter, I'd call it the antis. This is the anti-God, the dragon, calling out of the sea the antichrist, one with an anti-resurrection, who then has as his agent the anti-prophets, performing great signs so that people will be in awe and will worship the first beast and the dragon. There's the anti-people, the authority of people of every nation, language, tribe. This is the chapter of the antis. And so now, as we saw last week, we've been seeing those agents and those systems that are working against the faithful. We saw the full revelation in chapter 11. Now the attention is shifted, focusing on those who are contrary to the kingdom. And what we're seeing is that empire necessarily competes. Empire necessarily fights against the kingdom of God. But what we see in this chapter is that you either have the mark of the Lamb or the mark of the beast. Every person belongs to someone. And eventually that's going to come out. I think of, was it Dylan? Bob Dylan, you got to serve somebody? Who was that? I like having my computer here. I can just... It was Bob Dylan? Yeah, it was. You got to serve somebody. I like the lyrics to this song. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Indeed, you're going to have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. This is the anti-chapter. This is a chapter of allegiances. So where will your allegiance lie? With the kingdom or with the empire? Because the kingdom does not use the tactics of the empire. Those who kill with the sword will be killed by the sword. Agents of the kingdom don't use those tactics against even the empire. So church, this isn't necessarily a future prediction. It's an analysis of what was happening, an analysis of what does happen under empire. Is this prophetic? Absolutely. Is it a prediction? Well, that's not the purpose of prophecy. The point is faithfulness and endurance. Any final thoughts before we close for the night?